Today on Market Journal, groundwater is crucial to agriculture's livelihood. Hear what Nebraska researchers are doing to monitor this resource and keep us in good supply. With the government shutdown delaying important crop reports, you can still learn some ways to prepare for planting season. Our expert will break it down. And say cheese. At this photo exhibition all about farming, a picture is worth 1,000 herds. This week's edition of Market Journal starts right now.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hey everybody, I'm Frayne Olson, and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Hope everyone watching has been enjoying the new year. Lots to cover on today's show, so let's get started. Last week, we were joined by Dr. Frayne Olson of North Dakota State University Extension. We chatted about international trade and what the future holds for soybeans. This week, we continue our conversation and begin with his thoughts on the current state of the ag industry.
We're kind of feeling our way through this new path that we're down. There isn't a lot of clear direction on what might be coming next. There's still a lot of uncertainty about, the trade issues and how those trade issues are actually going to play out. And so I think the planning horizon for a lot of people has become much, much shorter. This time last year, I think people are looking further into the future, trying to make plans. Now the planning horizon is much tighter, and everybody's saying, well, we don't want to make too large a commitment because we may be making a mistake. We don't want to necessarily make real large investments in new enterprises until we have a better feel for what this might look like.
So I want to switch gears for a second and talk about technology in the ag industry. Is there anything in particular that you see on the horizon for 2019?
I guess I don't see anything as a single groundbreaking new technology coming in play, but I do think we're going to stay down the path of continued technology adoption, the use of technology. My view is I think we're going to spend a lot more time in the next year, possibly 2 years, really focusing on how do we use the information that we have available, especially being collected by some of the precision ag tools that we have. We've been able to collect this data. We're starting to figure out how to be able to analyze it, use that information for better decision making. We're getting some decision tools now that are using that information. I do think that's really going to be the focus the next few years, especially as margins remain tight. And there's this push for trying to increase efficiency and making sure that your decisions are sound and you're making the right move.
So do you think things like tech and trade will be the top issues for the new year, or anything else you see that you haven't mentioned?
Well, when we look at it from the marketing lens, there's always two big uncertainties, the weather and politics. And of course, trade falls into that politics category. So I do expect that we're going to be talking about the trade and trade issues, not only with China, but we're also working on trying to do some bilateral agreements with Japan. So I think the trade topic is going to be one of those ongoing themes. Weather is obviously an issue that we need to be focused on. And so I do see those as really the two big major topics, buckets or major categories of issues we need to face. I do think from a micro level, at the farm level, I think one of the issues that farmers are going to continue to struggle with for the next 6 to 12 months is how do we manage that grain inventory on the farm? How do we make sure it's in really good condition? We're making smart marketing decisions and we start moving that through the system.
And Frayne, as we wrap up here, any other advice for the year ahead?
I guess just keep your eyes open and pay attention. I mean, things are changing very, very quickly. Nobody really has a clear picture of what this is going to play out or how things are going to change. Talked to many people within the industry, from the farm level all the way through transportation and export levels, and everybody's trying to figure out what's coming next. So we're all kind of making this up as we go, if you will, and trying and experimenting. So try and leave your options open. Try and be as flexible as possible as we move through the next year. And again, think about your decisions and do make the best choices for your farm.
We've got part 1 of our interview with Frayne on the Market Journal YouTube page and our mobile app. Don't you love going to a restaurant and getting a free refill? If only topping off our groundwater was so easy. Nebraska farmers use it for irrigation, and the majority of people in the state rely on it for their drinking water. But sometimes the groundwater is depleted before it can be replenished. I spoke with UNL Hydrologist Dr. Gilmore about the research being done to estimate the state's groundwater.
Groundwater is hugely important to Nebraska. 88% of the folks in Nebraska depend on groundwater for their drinking water, including practically everyone in the rural areas of Nebraska. We have the most irrigated acres of any state in the U.S. and about 7.7 million acres that are irrigated with groundwater and about 7.4 million acre feet applied. And so obviously that means groundwater is hugely important to Nebraskans and for our health and our drinking water and for our agricultural production.
And what are recharge rates and how that relates to groundwater?
So groundwater recharge rate is the rate at which groundwater is being replenished in our aquifers. So it's a really important value that's related to how much groundwater is stored in the saturated sediments below our feet here in Nebraska. And it's something that's really actually pretty difficult to measure because it varies a lot over space, over different areas of the state, and also over time. We're always looking for new ways to measure groundwater recharge or estimate it. And then we compare often those results with previous studies to see if there's agreement, if we're kind of solidifying previous knowledge, or if we are kind of bringing a new angle on how much groundwater recharge we have.
Gotcha. So the research that's being done by you and your colleagues is attempting to estimate the recharge rate in a more consistent way. So could you give us a little bit of an overview on that research?
Yes, so we recently published some groundwater recharge rates for 3 areas in Nebraska. And the essence of the research is that we were looking at groundwater levels between pairs of streams. So the patterns of groundwater levels between 2 streams, which you can imagine stream valleys, right, that have a lower surface elevation or land surface elevation, and then there are areas between the streams that have higher surface elevation. And what we often find is that groundwater levels will mimic that land surface. And so along with Dr. Vitaly Zlotnik and one of my graduate students, we applied a very simple model to 3 areas in Nebraska, in the Sandhills, northeast Nebraska, and southwest Nebraska, to estimate groundwater recharge rate. And those rates came out, for the most part, on par with other estimates from those vicinities.
And what do you think are some ways that farmers will benefit as a result of this research?
So I think that any new approaches to groundwater recharge estimation are a real benefit for groundwater management in Nebraska. Mm-hmm. As I said, we're always trying to look for new ways because it's difficult to measure. And so these data, these results, can feed into much more complex models that are then used ultimately to make management decisions that impact farmers. Going forward, I think we need to continue to monitor the groundwater levels. I think there are probably ways that we can improve our monitoring. And then we also want to look at technologies and new approaches for managing the groundwater so that we can sustain its use for agricultural production and also to maintain stream flows in those areas.
Do you think that most farmers have a pretty good understanding of groundwater and how it relates to what they're trying to accomplish?
When I have a chance to talk with farmers, I find that they have often a really good practical knowledge of what is happening, particularly with their own irrigation wells. Maybe they've tried to drill wells and maybe they've had success or not. They're very aware of those practical issues. Some of the places that they can go for groundwater data and reports are the Department of Natural Resources website, which is excellent. We also have, with the Conservation and Survey Division, a report that comes out annually, and it's based largely on a lot of the data that are collected by natural resource districts across Nebraska. And that report is very comprehensive, it's statewide, and it tells us a lot about how groundwater levels are changing across the state.
If you're still thirsty for more, Dr. Gilmore tells me the annual groundwater level change report for 2018 will be available in about a month. In the meantime, we've posted more info on the Market Journal Facebook page. We'd love for you to check that out, and this is pretty cool. National Groundwater Awareness Week is March 10th through the 16th. Well, it's that time in the show when we get a check on the markets. The government shutdown means a delay in a slate of USDA crop reports. We'll look at what impacts agriculture could see as a result of the issues in D.C. And there may be some movement in the soybean market. Plus, what's happening overseas always makes news. We're going to talk trade and check on the latest with the international markets, too. This week, I sat down with Doug Simon, a commodity broker with Tredas. We got his answers on a wide range of topics.
Well, the farmers are going to the FSA this time of year where they start looking on new crop, production, what they're going to do for acres. So they're doing their crop reporting for last year on crop insurance, which that might not be necessarily impacted because that's on the private side, but you have some of those things that you're doing on the private side or the public side, and the government's where that impacts that. And if you're trying to get market facilitation payments or doing any of those things, yeah, there's definitely some problems there right now. But going forward, it's hard to tell how long that's going to take place. But in terms of government reports, there's a lot of times, sometimes farmers say, oh, I wish those government reports wouldn't come out, but we're going to miss out on a WASDE report, the World Ag Supply and Demand. There's a quarterly stocks report, which is important. So the January report's one of the biggest ones of the years in terms of trying to finish up on last year's crop, report or production, but then also looking forward on what's going on internationally.
So what are some things you'll be looking at with that WASDE report when it does come out?
Well, right now, a lot of the trade, even though the government might not be working, the traders are working and thinking in their heads what's going to happen with production. And basically, I think that we'll see a little lower production on both the corn and the soybeans, both through lower yield, but also through lower acres on both of them. Maybe a 40 million bushel cut on the soybean side, maybe an 80 million bushel cut on the corn side. On the other side, that's the production side of it. The demand side of it is probably the bigger concern, however. Ethanol, we've had like a 40% collapse in oil prices. Our ethanol margins over the last 4 months have been negative. Probably worried that we're probably going to cut ethanol demand by 50 million bushels. Exports have been really good on the corn side, but they started lagging here a little bit in the last couple of weeks. So there's a little fear we might drop maybe the corn demand just a touch. And on the bean side, obviously with the trade discussions going on, we've had pretty significant drop in inspections of soybean exports this year. The USDA's only got that down 11% year on year, but they're actually down 42% below what they were last year. So that's a pretty big lag on the demand side, on the export side of it. And we'll see on the crush side what will happen there. But so the demand side's a little bit suspect. We'll see a little cut in the production, but I'm more worried about the demand side on that report. And then you're going to look at the world numbers from Brazil. We've got their bean crop up at 122 million metric tons. There's some, with the dry weather down there right now, there's some worries that it could be lower, maybe 2 to 3 to 4 lower. I've seen some other estimates that are 8 million metric tons lower. But it's like July down there right now. So you get some rain, it's going to help their crop, if it stays drier. And that kind of band across north central Brazil has been dry, and it's projected to stay dry for the next 10 to 15 days, and it's kind of stagnant, so there's definitely some concern about the weather down there. To me, that's probably the biggest driving factor right now in the soybean market.
Yeah, so any other advice for farmers right now as they do prep for planting season?
Well, we've had a rally in the corn and the beans again here. We had kind of washed out over the last couple of weeks ago. We're back up to 960 on new crop soybeans. We're at 404, 405 on the Dees corn. I really like that place to make incremental sales. I think I've talked about that before. When we get north of $4 on corn, you're looking at carry of maybe 12 cents when we get out next year at this time. Add that carry to it, and that's a 405 plus 12 is 417. Trade a good basis. You got a good number on corn. The beans is really more hard to to just go out and flat hedge that or something. Probably look at some type of option strategy, either sell it, hedge it, and buy a call, or buy a put, sell a call above it. Give you some type of window, because even though there's a lot of negativity in the soybean market, those soybeans can be pretty volatile. I don't think the resolution of the trade side of it's going to give us a big bullish jump on the soybean side. I mean, last year we had USDA saying we were going to export or China would import like 103 million metric tons of beans. This year we're down to 90. Yeah. That's almost a 500 million bushel swing in the use that they're going to use in China. So it's still pretty negative on the soybean side.
Any news on wheat?
Well, we're going to plant probably less acres again on wheat. The Risk Management Agency, the number of acres that they've got registered are lower than last year. And last year was the lowest wheat acres we've had in 90 years. So that's important because that means we're probably going to have more acres available to plant corn and soybeans. And last year we planted 90 million acres, almost 90 million acres of corn and beans. So this year with the lower, price of beans, we're probably going to plant fewer beans, more corn. And now if we didn't plant as much wheat, we probably got a little bit more that can go into that mix as well. But if you get up toward 93 million acres of corn planted, bean acres be down toward 86 million, somewhere in there. Really, when you look forward into next year, those carryouts are going to probably be similar to what we had this last year, 1.7 billion bushels on corn and 1 billion on beans, which are, very heavy on the bean side and maybe a little more optimistic down the road on corn.
Next week, we'll be joined by Dr. Darrell Peel. He's an agricultural economist from Oklahoma State University. So if you have a question you'd like for me to ask him, email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along. It's time for this week's trivia question. And earlier in the show, we spoke with Troy Gilmore about the importance of groundwater. That leads into our question today. Roughly how many households have their own well? Here are your choices. Is it 4%, 9%, 13%, or 17%? Make your guess, and I'll have the answer after Al's forecast. It's common knowledge that the average age of farmers and ranchers in the U.S. is increasing. And with that increasing age comes a massive transition of ag land assets in the years to come. In many counties in eastern and central Nebraska, over 50% of the cropland is rented out. This has different implications for landlords and tenants in different areas. And in the near future, some producers, if they aren't already, will likely be working with multiple absentee landowners. In the January Nebraska Farmer, Nebraska Extension agricultural economist Jim Jansen offers some timely tips for tenants and landlords working with these situations. It's time now for weather with Nebraska Extension ag climatologist and Market Journal chief meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, all things considered, I would say most folks are pretty happy with what January has brought us so far. How much longer can we expect this to continue?
Well, Troy, it has been a fairly decent month, but this precipitation that came in just a reminder that winter still exists here in Nebraska, even with these warmer temperatures. And even with the snowfall, it doesn't appear in the immediate term that we are going to be dealing with any sustained cold air push into the region. That looks like it might last out, or it might come in as we get toward the end of the month, but for right now, this looks like just a temporary break from an overall warm pattern. So if we go to the upper air models today, the one thing we're dealing with is an upper air low in the southwest that's pushing energy out into the southern plains. At the surface, we're getting moisture feed to the north, and that is what has been helping the precipitation shield across Nebraska as we have cold high pressure coming in from Canada on the northwest, low pressure to the southeast, and the confluence line right over the central United States brings out an area of accumulating snowfall across southeast, east central Nebraska, and it looks like total accumulations are probably going to be generally in the 1 to 3 inch range. And as we go to tomorrow, we're going to see that trough move toward the east, high pressure settle in. We'll start to see some warming temperatures. Instead of being in the upper 20s to or lower 30s, we're going to be consistently in the mid 30s. And most of the precipitation shield shifts well to our east. And as we get into the day on Monday, we see that trough move to the east and we start to see ridging take place, so much warmer conditions in store. There is some evidence of a surface low that may want to develop in west central Colorado or west central Kansas, but we have no moisture feed into it, so it's going to be pretty much a dry frontal boundary passage. And then we'll see the high pressure ridge build even stronger into the middle portion of the week as we see temperatures returning well into the 40s. A series of low pressure systems, once again indicated by the modelers, maybe try to develop along the lee of the Rocky Mountains, but once again, because of their speed and because we do not have an orientation bringing southerly winds into our region, not much in the way of moisture. Now as we get into the midweek period, that high pressure system still stays in place aloft. We still see these thermal lows, but once again, moisture is lacking with the more significant precipitation on the eastern and western United States coast. And as we go into the day on Thursday, what we are going to see now is some breaking down of that ridge and a little bit more energy starting to undercut it into the southwest once again as we bring low pressure systems into California and the southwest. High pressure dominates most of the central and northern plains. So the main precipitation shield will be to our southwest, and we will see some cooling temperatures, but nothing significant. Now as we get into Friday, things get a little bit more interesting as this system starts to take shape in the southwest. starts to move in an eastward fashion, and we also have the northern jet that's starting to push toward the south. So the confluence will start to bring moisture up into the southern Rockies, and as this system moves out into the plains next week, and it is potential that we will once again see some accumulating snowfall, particularly if this system takes a southern route. More importantly, that northern stream energy does look like it's going to shift toward the east, but then as we go later into the middle of next week and the following weekend, it looks like we're going to start to see an established northwest and northerly flow aloft, bringing in much cooler conditions and below normal temperatures. Now, this is shown at the end of the model period, so if this does occur, we're going to need several more days of model run confirmation to feel comfortable with that forecast, but right now that looks like our best switch. So we look at the 8 to 14-day forecast. You can see the abundance of above normal temperatures extending from next Thursday through the following Tuesday. And in terms of precipitation, although we see this above normal precipitation, I think much of the upper portion of the Midwest is way overplayed in terms of the moisture shown.
Thanks, Al. Back to trivia now, and this week we asked, how many households have their own well? If you guessed C, 13%, you got it right. Job well done. That number of 13% represents about 34 million people. For our final story today, a photographer's lens can capture some of the rawest of human emotions: surprise, joy, sadness, even defeat. When you're a farmer, you can get those feelings and more in just a single growing season. A new photo exhibit at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Great Plains Art Museum aims to show a collection of farmers in a new light. Here's what happens when art and agriculture come together.
My practice as an artist is really less about communicating or provoking. It's much more about asking questions and exploring. And so for me, the photography, the pictures, the camera, it's a way to interact. It's an excuse to talk to people.
Each wall tells a story. Each image evokes an emotion. The subjects are familiar, serving as representations of members of your own family, a friend, or even yourself. The new Farmers exhibition is the brainchild of photographer Brian Darby, designer Tim Hostler, and sociologist Dr. Paul Stock. While teaching in Kansas, Brian and Paul met at a faculty workshop and quickly discovered a shared interest in food and farming. What began as an idea to snap a few photos and learn about the area has now morphed into a collaborative research project, touted as an observation of today's independent farmer.
It started with Brian making friends at our local farmers market. But then once you get into this world, you gain trust, you earn friendship, and you start to meet other people. So in sociology, we would call it snowball sampling, where you start with the metaphor being you start at the top and it builds from there.
Tim, a designer with a fondness for experimental narratives, rounded out the team. As the trio's reputation grew across the Kansas farming community, so did the families who wanted to be involved. Since beginning the project in 2014, 15 farms have been showcased and countless more photos have been taken. To keep with the new farmers theme, everyone involved agreed the subjects would be new to farming or experienced producers trying something different. The finished project would serve as an outlet for farmers to tell their stories and a visual reminder of what American agriculture can achieve.
There was something about the life, about the ability to grow food, to be a part of the community differently. So there's that newness we focused on, but always about trying to innovate and be entrepreneurial.
What are the conventions? Are there other ways of doing things? Are there ways that are being overlooked? Or what are the new experimental things? So that was the kind of envelope that wrapped around the pictures.
Brian chose to take the photos with a large view camera. The complicated equipment extended the length of the shoots and encouraged more trust and interaction with the participants. But what about the black and white?
Black and white is inexpensive. It's still expensive. Each one of these has a dollar price attached to it just in the processing of making it. But it was the most inexpensive route. So that's one way I like, one reason for using black and white. I like black and white also because it is less literal, right? Color photographs are quite literal. Black and white removes us one step from that. So right away it kind of allows us to more easily talk about, mythology or, or metaphor, and to kind of dig in a little bit deeper level.
About 50 photos made it into the final exhibit. Farmers in the field, farmers at home, families united in their love for the land and one another. Each photo speaking to the viewer in a different way.
There are these unexpected stories sitting out there that aren't being told.
The new farmers exhibit has been shown across the plains, at Harvard, Yale, and even a university in Switzerland. And as those stories are told and more people are reached, farming becomes more than corn, beans, or cattle. It becomes a journey of self-discovery and understanding one's place in contemporary agriculture.
This whole experience was really great, just getting to know the people and getting to get to know them, getting to know their families, getting to know their farms. And then just kind of this work is sort of like in some ways it's a gift to them, I guess. Like it's something that we wanted to do for them, but then to also get this research out.
It's really transcended anything that any one of us could have ever really imagined. And that speaks to both their talent, but also the teamwork and collaboration that we've put into this. And it really did evolve. I think what I'm most proud of is this kind of doesn't fit into our normal research categories of how you set up a team. And it was just something that we wanted to do and see where it went. And so to now see it up in 2 museums and a couple publications come out of it and some small research money that's come with it, it really goes to show what can happen if you follow kind of your passion rather than some of the grant dollars.
Once again, the exhibit is showing at UNL's Great Plains Art Museum until February 16th. While you're there, snag a copy of the new Farmers newspaper, which was created for the exhibit too. Paul, Tim, and Brian have a plan to turn the photos and farmer interviews into a book. We've also posted a link with more information about the project on the Market Journal Facebook page. That's going to do it for this week's show. Hope to see you right back here next time. Until then, I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.